we have up until now been talking about the 3 pillars of radio and station management in detail with regards to their roles, duties, responsibilities, etc., what it is that they're doing. So today we're working, well, for this class, we're looking at managing radio, your textbook Managing Radio from page 42 to 57, which is also working in radio management. Okay, it's a little bit different to Next Level Radio, which I think is a really good thing because you get to see the different sides of it from a UK perspective as well. So we understand that employment patterns have changed a lot over the last 20 years, right? 20 years ago, we didn't need a social media specialist or a digital specialist or creative or content producers and things like that. There were quite a few roles that have come as society is growing and changing, right? So we had to change with it, and we do, which means there are a lot of roles that have been integrated and some have been taken away even. So that's kind of where we're standing at the moment. And there are a lot of new technologies for things like production and control that we are utilizing and that radio management is a part of now. So managers are now expected themselves to be multi-skilled, but also I expect my employees now to be multi-skilled and flexible. So not necessarily multitask, be able to multitask, but multi-skilled. So that's also why your course is the way that it is, because we are upskilling you in different sides, not just in one thing. So you can't, well, you're not going to walk out and only be a presenter. You can be a presenter, producer, a manager, content creator, working marketing, working sales, whatever it is. Okay, there are so many different fields that you can now do because as much as you can focus on one thing, I know they always say what jack of one trade, master of none, whatever. That doesn't reflect through media. Okay, in the media industry, you need to be able to do more than one thing. So multitasking or multi-skilling, however you want to put it, but multitasking obviously refers to being able to do one thing at a time. But this textbook of yours uses the term multitasking, but it may be more consistent and precise to say multi-skilling, as this job involves enrichment, whilst traditionally multitasking simply involves increasing tasks and loading the fragmentation, so de-skilling. Okay, so when I talk about multitasking here, it actually means multi-skilling. Okay, so being able to do more than one thing. So multitasking, or multi-skilling rather, has been identified as the core skill by the industry training body. Okay, it's one of those things you need to be able to have more than one skill. And in practice, most people prefer to be involved across the station, not just having one specialist role. So people normally like being involved in different sectors, like for instance, being a presenter, but also being able to produce, perhaps being a DJ and an MC as well, perhaps creating your own content, whatever it might be, script writer, etc. Okay, so the boundaries between different production roles have become quite blurred. That's the one field where the skill set has become a lot more blurred than it used to be back in the day. And as a team, you need to understand the nature of the production in depth, more in depth, for you to understand where it is that you fit in this whole sector. Okay, and we're going to talk more about that. But when we look at radio, okay, and we look at the way that the BBC, for instance, employs people, there's they have about 2,000 people in the community and voluntary radio sector, as they call it. Okay, so they have about 20,000 people in the rest of it, between commercial and public sector. So BBC itself, obviously, the public sector. So let's look quickly at community radio from their perspective. So the UK community sector has evolved rapidly over the last decade. Okay, there was a very big push on public radio prior to that, but now the community radio sector is really big. I mean, I work with 91 community radio stations in the UK alone. Okay, I have one company called I Love Radio that has contact with all of them. So I don't personally call them all 91 of them. I have one contact that works with this 91 radio stations, and that's just a small portion of the radio stations. Okay. So personal development in radio and in management has become a focus point in the last couple of years, because we've just realized how much upskilling is needed and how much more we need to put in there. And where do we get this training? Where does it come from? Okay, some people do degrees in it like you guys do, but overall, we get this through the community radio stations, right? Which also includes our campus radio stations. So community radio stations provide this valuable training ground for anyone who wants to go into commercial at some point, because this is your starting point. This is where they teach you the basics in order for you to be skilled, to be able to get to that point where you can perhaps be a commercial radio manager, right? Obviously, that'll require years and years of working there before you get to that point. But still, it is now this point. And I've told you before that community radio stations kind of do grumble about the fact that they teach these people, they upskill them, and then commercial radio stations come in and grab them up. Also taking into consideration that the community radio stations can't really afford to pay them, okay? But community radio stations have a very, very valuable role to play in the overall rounding of presenters and would-be radio managers. So community radio stations have always acted as this good training ground and as a springboard for work, in this case in the BBC, so in public radio or in commercial radio. So in community radio, volunteers come to the station with whatever skill sets they have that can be utilized for the station's benefit and for their own. So you could join like a community team or a technical team or the marketing team or the sales team, whatever it is, and be upskilled further through that. Community radio stations are unique in their ability to attract volunteers and to create alliances with people who have this huge variety of skills and professional experience, because most people, when they start out as a volunteer at a radio station, at a community radio station, they have a day job, okay, because it's not going to pay you. And it could be anything. I've, like in the past, had people who have done science, law. There's a lot of lawyers, accountants, BSc, like in sports or whatever it is. Okay, so it's so many different types of people who come together within this community atmosphere, and then kind of find their feet and their passion, and they get upskilled through that as well. So when it comes to production, there are a lot of production houses, but radio stations, a lot of radio stations also have a producer, right? So we've gone through the three types of producers, and we know that most radio stations don't necessarily have all three. They will have an audio one, and then they will have a content and administrative producer normally, right? But there are also all these other people who are producers, who can produce. And the independent production sector is growing throughout the world. And if we look at it from the BBC's point of view, from the UK point of view, their progress is slow, okay? Our progress is actually quite good when it comes to the outside producers, the people who can do these things for us. So independent producers will range from multinational commercial giants to one-person companies. You can have a team of people who might do your advertising or your whatever it is for like 20 commercial radio stations, or you could be one person who is assisting one or two smaller radio stations, whatever it is. So essentially, independent producers manage the whole production process, delivering programming for an agreed price. So I say, cool, I'll make this ad for you for 20,000 Rand. And then I work at it, whatever. That involves from the scripts to the voices, to the voiceovers, to the actual recording, the editing, the putting everything together, the producing of this thing, the mastering it, sending it to client, getting it back, making changes, blah, 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 etc., etc. Okay, the whole process. So increasingly, independent producers are able to run their own internet radio services as well, right? And podcasts, because they understand the technical side of things, they understand the production side of things. So you can, well, they can start their own internet services, but a lot of them do podcasts independently. So yeah, they don't need to fall under a broadcasting hierarchy and the commercial sector. But the commercial sector has, though, started recognizing the benefits of using independent production. And if someone already has started a podcast, it's easy for you to latch onto that. Or if you understand their skill sets, it's easy for you to bring them in. So rather than making them competition, you make them a part of you as well. So in 2007, quite a few years ago, obviously, independent productions were responsible for almost a quarter of the 110 Sony nominations and 6 out of the BBC's 20 Gold Awards. So this number has increased and is still increasing to where we're standing now. The minimum proportion of BBC network output being independent production, so that's 10%, is determined by the BBC Trust. So what the BBC says is that the minimum amount of network output work that we are putting forth by independent people need to be 10%. Okay, higher, hopefully, preferably, but 10% is the minimum that we can make use of them. So we need to use them more. So the BBC has set up a system of commissioners who they can use and select from in-house, but also from independent companies. So they have a system of people that they can make use of. And what they do is they will pitch to both of them. They will give them both the brief and give them both time. So in-house and out-house or independent. Give them both time to pitch for this thing. So they're creating kind of like an element of competition between in-house and independent producers to see what they can come up with. So commissioning decisions should be based solely on the creative merits of the proposal and the value for money offered to the license fee payer. So what is it that we're getting out of it at the end of the day? So that's how it should be working. And thus far, it has been working quite well that way. Okay, and now when we start looking at typical management roles in the UK, you have a little bit of a difference between what I've taught you so far, between how we call things in South Africa and how they will do it in the UK. So job titles, they can also vary from station to station and even within the same group. So a managing editor has overall responsibility of a BBC local radio station. That name again, managing editor, is the person responsible for the overall BBC local radio station. While the equivalent of a commercial radio station will be a managing director. So managing editor, managing director, same thing, different places. Where we call it also either a managing director or a station manager, or there are a few different ways you can put it, but that's the main ones. So many of these community radio stations are under the day-to-day control of the station manager. So in smaller operations, an individual may cover a number of different functions, which would be separate from in a larger organization. So if you're working for a smaller radio station, you might be the station manager and the programming manager at the same time, or you might be the marketing manager while having a show on air while doing sales on the side. Where in a commercial space, that will be 3 different jobs. Okay, so in a smaller radio station, we do make use of the people that we have and what we can get out of them and what they can do at the end of the day. So the managing director or the station manager may also present a radio program, like I just said, or even sell advertising themselves, or double as the head of programming or sales. You can do numerous different things. I don't always know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you know, you can do it under these smaller radio stations. So let's start looking at programming. So PM, program manager, programs. So under the control of what they call the program controller. So in South Africa, it's the program manager. There it's called the program controller. And the department includes program production and presentation staff, aka presenters and freelance presenters. The head of the department is also referred to as the program director, the head of programs, or the station manager. Okay, don't get confused. In South Africa, we refer to this position as the program manager, but in the UK, it could be program director, head of programs, or even station manager. Okay, keeping in mind not the same meaning. In BBC local radio, this is part of the role of the managing editor. Once again, another name, supported by one or two of the assistant editors. So you could be a program director, the head of programs, station manager, or the managing editor. All of those come down to one thing, program manager. So don't confuse yourselves, okay? Don't get confused here with the different terminologies. So only on very large radio stations will a producer be responsible for the production of an individual show. In some cases, the breakfast show may be produced by a team, including a producer and the presenters and a production assistant. But elsewhere on the schedule, a presenter will be expected to prepare, produce, and present their own show. So that is similar to how we do it here as well, right? So a number of roles have developed which control elements of programming across the schedule. So things like, for instance, the head of music might be responsible not only for the station's overall music policy and playlists, but also using specialist music scheduling software for selecting the individual tracks to be played in a show. So what does that mean? It means you need to not only understand music really well and the station's audience in terms of music, but also how to work with music scheduling software at the end of the day. So others may prepare, for example, community or what's on information or promotions of competitions, things that we use in the show. So this community or what's on information, those are those sections that you find on radio stations where they'll just say what is on this weekend or what is happening in the community in or around you. And someone obviously needs to record this thing. And then you will have your producer who will do the competition promotions in this case. But again, in the UK, depending on who it is, the head of music might need to do this also. So a little bit of a different role they included. But in all the largest radio stations, these roles will be added to the duties of a regular presenter. Okay, so a regular presenter will do all these extra things along with their presenting duties. So presenters are responsible for adapting the material for other kind of streams, so for online streams and for websites and podcasts and video services, etc. And the department usually includes news and sport preparation and presentation under the control of the news editor or head of news. We do something similar. Okay, we also have a news editor or the head of news who also is in charge of all news worthy items and people. So the program controller is responsible for all the elements which contribute to the listener's experience, including the news and the information coverage and music scheduling. So again here, you could be called the head of music, which means you could be the head of music, but you also need to understand the music scheduling software, aka music scheduler, or do other things, whatever it might be called. And in a larger radio station, you wouldn't need to do this stuff because it will fall under the duties of certain presenters. And in a smaller radio station, you will have a news editor or a head of news where this will fall under. But you also have your program controller who overall is responsible for anything that goes out on air. Okay, anything that covers my listening experience, aka including news and information coverage, music scheduling, etc. So the programs department is also responsible for station imaging production. So your producer, who is responsible for the production of our imaging, also sits under the programs department. And these elements of the elements of station marketing, which are not sales promotions. Okay, so there are quite a few things that will fall under the PM or the program director or the head of programs or the station manager, however you want to call them. Are you all still with me? You with me? Understanding the differences that we have?
Yes, ma'am.
So that is programming, once again. Okay, so titles vary depending on whether it's a commercial radio station, a public radio station, or a community radio station, how big it is. So there can be a program controller that can run everything, can also be the program director or head of programs or station manager. In SA, it is the program manager. In BBC local radio, this is a managing editor. And then we said their roles can differ, but overall, this program controller, program manager is responsible for all the elements that contribute to my listening experience, anything involved there. Then sales. So in commercial radio, the sales manager, or they also call it the sales director, is responsible for revenue from commercials, sponsorships, and co-promotions and things like that. So the sales area usually includes separate departments for commercial productions, for sales productions, and for sales traffic. So for the production of this thing, for the promotions or the promotions of sales overall, and for sales traffic, that is the traffic scheduling, which gets done, aka my ad scheduling, right, on my scheduler. So in most commercial radio stations, the majority of employees work in sales-related roles. That's a big number of people sit in sales because we need to make a lot of money. So advertising sales are undertaken by the team of sales executives, similar to us. Specific individuals may be tasked with selling sponsorship and promotion opportunities. The sales team is often supported by a dedicated administrator, so someone who will just sit and do the admin. Smaller radio stations usually find that it's not cost effective to maintain their own in-house commercial production department. So they don't really have someone who in-house only focuses on creating ads. Okay, it's not cost effective because you need to cover the costs of a whole production studio. So it's just not, you just don't get enough work in to cover the costs of this dedicated studio and copywriter and producer and engineer. Doesn't mean they don't do it. They just do it on a smaller scale. So a lot of these smaller radio stations do have a production facility, but whoever it is, the producer would be producing all jingles and imaging for the radio station, as well as advertising jingles when need be, as well as anything else they can do to sell for money. Okay, under that. Otherwise, adverts are scripted and produced by the client's brief by specialist external companies. That's how it works majority of the time, 80% of the time, okay? Normally, if it goes in-house, it would be promotions only, okay? We would have you produce the promotions for this thing that's going to run on your show, but the actual ads, we will get a creative company and a production company and copywriters to come up with the scripts and then find the voices and then record this whole thing separately, okay? Similarly, scheduling. So scheduling your transmission of adverts is a crucially important task. And in a large commercial radio station, it can become very complex, especially if you have like 30 different clients wanting to advertise in this one section. So normally 1 or 2 staff members will be known as the traffic department, and they will be responsible for scheduling the ads, and they fall under the station manager. Then we get engineering, right? So once upon a time, when studio equipment had a lot more moving parts, and transmitters had things like glowing valves, and there was a constant need for supervision, then we used to have engineering and maintenance on site, okay, like who would be there often to make sure everything runs as it should be, because it was analog. It's not like it is now that's digital. So these days, station engineers spend more time dealing with IT and software issues and less with the actual equipment, the actual hardware. And as a result, there's no longer this need for an individual station to have their own resident engineer. So you can have one engineer look after 20 different radio stations, okay? Because it's a case of I no longer need you to be there because my different parts keep breaking all the time. So many smaller radio stations contract the work to an outside company or a local freelancer. Like the company I used to work with is a company called Blue Cow, and they service quite a few radio stations in not just South Africa, in Africa, where they would go and fix things and do things. But on the whole, it's not a case of you get these people in often. You normally get them in once a month to check and do maintenance and stuff, and then the rest of the time it's just if it's really a need for it. So the engineering department is usually responsible for the provision of the internet services and websites. Other times you might have a separate IT department that'll run that, okay? So like I say, although this would be delegated to a separate team or IT specialist within a group, but your engineers can do that. I mean, they are engineers, okay? So they can do that if need be, but normally you have an IT specialist who will purely focus on anything network related. So transmitter engineering, though, is a specialized area often contracted to one or a handful of broadcasters or one or a handful of broadcast transmission suppliers. Although a simple low power transmitter for a single station may be maintained by a local engineer. So in South Africa, we literally only do have a handful of people who can work with the transmitters. Overall, it's Centec that runs it. So Centec has engineers who will go and fix local transmitters if they do break. But yeah, we struggle with Centec. So if you can get someone else who specializes in it, who does understand it, who can work with it, to come in and assist you with maintaining it. So in the case where a station will operate without continuous technical support on site, the station manager needs to have enough technical understanding to oversee these output suppliers effectively. So small radio stations, community radio stations, you don't have all these other things. You don't have money to pay all these people. So as a station manager then, or a director, you need to understand all the moving parts. You need to have enough technical understanding to know when it's your transmitter, when it's your on-air studio that's giving you issues, or wherever what issue might be. You need to have some sort of technical background to be able to figure out what the problem is in order to oversee your suppliers, your outside suppliers effectively. So that's the engineers. Then what else do we have? What else do we find in a radio station? We have an administration, but we also have other things like a finance department, a human resource department, which is really important, especially given that it's such a creative industry and we work with such creative people. So most people forget that a radio station still has to function like a normal business. So it still needs these normal business elements. So they need to conduct themselves like any other individual company will. So at a small station, a head of administration might be responsible for all the personal matters, all personnel matters, accountants, booking, invoicing, general secretarial work, office cleaning, and building maintenance and security. Okay, they can do all those roles if it's a small radio station. A large radio station will have additional staff members specializing, for instance, in accountancy. So I will have accountants, a financial department. I will have human resources. Might even go so far as to have an ER team that human resources will fall under. Where community radio stations will have a a specific need for individuals to recruit and coordinate and support volunteers, perhaps train them also, and to liaise with other organizations within this community. So there are other job skills that pop up depending on the type of radio station that you have. So unlike many of these more specialized broadcasting skills unique to a radio station, in these administrator kind of fields, there are multiple trained and experienced people available. So unlike an engineer that are quite scarce, especially when it comes to people who can work with like transmitters, admin and finance and human resource people there are a lot of them, right? A lot of very experienced people you can hire here. So everyone doesn't need to have a radio background. Depends on the field that you are in. It depends on the role that you are fulfilling at this point. So let's look at the station manager from a UK perspective. So we've looked at it in detail from a South African perspective. If we look at the UK station manager, the various department heads will still report to this station manager, also known as the managing editor or managing director, who then in turn will be answerable to a board of directors, group management, or management committee for the day-to-day running of the organization. So you still have a boss in a commercial or public sphere. So often in community radio stations, the station manager will double as one of the department heads. So whether it's sales or manager, a sales manager or marketing manager or programming controller, as well as being the managing director. So why do we do this? Because I save on a high level salary, but it also makes the most use of the skills and the talent available in an industry where relevant management skills are regarded as being in short supply. Yeah, there are a handful of people that are regarded as really, really great station managers. And there is this, they do see it as like there's this short supply in the management skills necessary to do all these different jobs. So the overall station management often takes responsibility for other matters, which falls in both programming and sales. So things like station marketing and public relations, and will usually be responsible for maintaining good relations with outside bodies. So other people that you need to work with, for example, the local authorities, your government, major sponsors, industry bodies, and regulators. As a station manager, you need to get along with all of these guys. Most importantly, the station manager is responsible for the efficiency and the morale of the whole team. Similar as here. For the development of the overall vision, the brand values, and the corporate culture of said radio station. So within a larger group of commercial or BBC stations, the manager is usually expected to allocate tasks and spending according to the parent company's priorities and an agreed local budget. So if you are one radio station, within an umbrella company of 50 radio stations, then you will be given certain tasks and a certain budget by whoever runs the overall umbrella company that you need to stick to at the end of the day. So no two radio stations will ever be structured exactly the same. It just doesn't work that way, even if they are carrying the same brands within the same group. So the effective manager will modify the structure to make the most of the skills and the talent available locally. So what do we do here? We look at you as people. We don't only look at what it is that you think you can do, we look at what it is that you're good at and structure available to that as well. So in community radio, where many tasks are taken on by volunteers, the station manager is often the only paid member in the station. So in South Africa, that also happens, but what you find here more is that the managers get paid. So whether it's a sales manager, a marketing manager, and a station manager, or perhaps an operations manager and a program manager, however many you have, they normally get paid. Volunteers normally don't. Very few community radio stations do pay. And if they do, it would be quite a small salary. So then what else do we get? So now we've spoken about the station manager. The next thing we talk about is consultants. So what happens? A lot of station managers at some point when they decide to move on and they no longer want to work a fixed job or whatever it is, they become consultants, okay? They become radio consultants. A continuing loss of audience or funding demands rapid and often dramatic changes in station operation, while a change of ownership usually brings with it a sense of its own objectives and priorities. So if you keep losing audiences or funds, there's something needs to change, right? Something big needs to happen. Or if you have a change of ownership, you might have different objectives and priorities and other things you want to do. So what do we do then? We bring in a consultant. A good consultant who is well briefed can achieve a great deal of things by bringing additional expertise into the room, by bringing in new ideas, and by bringing in objectivity, okay, to a station situation. They are not subjective. They don't have feelings for the employees or for you. So they can objectively look at a situation and give you the facts. So often only an outside person has the objectivity and the lack of personal involvement in the history of a station that's needed to analyze the current position where they're standing and impartially recommend new policies. Often that is very difficult from the inside because there is personal involvement, there is bias. So it's about finding someone that's unbiased. Some consultants are small companies, okay? You have a small company that you run, a consultancy, often effectively one individual specializing in one specific field, from programming and music selection through transmission planning or studio design or research analysis, presentation skills, voice coaching, sales and management training. Then you also get consultancy firms that offer a range of services under one roof. So including everything needed for a successful license application or station launch. So this person will help you from A to Z with your station application or with the building of your radio station, or they can even help you with, pretty much most of these things we just mentioned previously, okay? So there was an article in the Harvard Business Review that set out 8 fundamental objectives of effective management consulting. So what does it take to effectively be a management consultant? First and foremost, you are responsible to a client's request for information. Responsible. You are responding. Okay, that should be. You are responding to a client's request for information. Number 2, you are providing solutions to these specified problems. Number 3, you are making a diagnosis, which may involve a redefinition of the problem. So you might be changing the problem. Number 4, making recommendations based on this diagnosis of yours. Number 5, assisting with the implementation of recommended changes. Number 6, building a consensus and a commitment. Number 7, facilitating client learning. And number 8, they're enhancing organizational effectiveness. Okay, so before radio stations spend money on a consultant, it is crucial that everyone is on the same page, that all members of management teams accept that there is a problem and that the station can't solve it internally. Hence, we need an outside objective viewpoint here. We need someone from the outside to come and assist us. The consultant should not be used as a referee to resolve internal conflict. And that happens, right? So you're spending your money on a consultant, fine. That you want to be someone like objective. But what we find happens a lot is that you bring in a person to resolve an internal conflict. So to say that person, that's the problem right there. Instead of having them there for any philosophical differences, for well, to not get involved in any of the philosophical differences that you might have with a colleague. Those you need to sort out internally as a station manager. As a station manager, it's your job to make sure that everyone gets along with everyone. If you can't do that, shouldn't be the station manager there, okay? So we get consultants in not to sort out petty small things or whatever, our viewpoints, but to assist with making our radio station better overall. Whether it is a new breakfast presenter that's needed, or a new sound that's needed, or a different approach to something that is needed. So everyone needs to be a partner in the decision-making process. And we all need to have the same clear goals, okay? We all need to know where we are going and heading with this. And the management team all need to feel ownership within this process for this thing to work. The consultant should seem like an additional member of staff, okay? Brought in to handle a project or to provide a second set of ears, not to resolve anything else. Also, you need to be on the same page. So you can't get in a consultant and ask them to come up with a solution for you to bring in more money, let's say on the breakfast show. Then they come back to you and they say, cool, yes, here's what you need to do. You need to get a new breakfast presenter. You can't use the one you have anymore. It doesn't work. You need a new one. So get rid of that one. And then you go, thank you for that advice. And you carry on as if they said nothing, because you don't want to do what they've asked you to do. All right. That defeats the whole purpose of spending the money in the first place then, to get a consultant. So radio is often seen as a stepping stone to work in like the more glamorous or prestigious TV role. Okay, that happens in South Africa a lot as well, where people jump from radio to TV. However, the one thing that you do need to realize is that people who choose to work in radio in whatever capacity they find can find a very wide range of jobs and roles in the industry. Also, because of the type of industry that it is, it's a lot easier for you to jump to TV than it is for someone who is in the TV business to get into radio, right? Because you're taught to be flexible and that things happen on the fly, that things can change right away. You work under a lot of stress, okay? You are turned, you understand how radio works. You understand that this is an always ongoing business. So it's something that you can work in. And this kind of, what this brings forth is that radio is one of those areas into which you can always transfer skills and experience that you've learned in other jobs. You can use your background. You can use anything else that you have to bring to the table. So there's a whole range of things that you can do in addition to radio, or that you can do within radio, which you wouldn't necessarily have been able to do otherwise. And there's also more employment opportunities through that, and through the developing of all these new roles that are also coming forth every single day on a day-to-day basis within radio, and where we're at digitally, and where we're at with artificial intelligence and utilizing augmented reality, etc., etc. Okay, they all still work together. So radio will always work with these things. So, what should you have gotten out of this? You should get out of it that the radio industry has a lot of similarities. Even though they might not always be called the same thing. Some stations might expect you to know more, others might expect you to do less, or simply use one part of your skill set, not all of it, okay? But at the end of the day, when it comes to radio, you can see it's always ongoing. And as radio develops, new positions develop and come forth. So there'll always be opportunity for work for you within the radio sphere, whichever way it might be on, okay? Any questions for me?
No.
I sent out an email earlier today, which is really important. It just says that you need to start sending me your show prep for next week. Okay, I need it by Monday morning. Just an FYI.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, but then you must have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I shall see you tomorrow again at 10:20.